Blair Adams was born on December 28, 1964 in Surrey, British Columbia, Canada. Raised in the Vancouver suburbs, he worked primarily in construction, eventually becoming a foreman. Described by his mother, Sandra Edwards, as kind and ambitious, Blair also had a reputation for being confrontational and impulsive, with a history of substance abuse. By the mid-1990s, he had accumulated a minor criminal record in Canada, including charges related to illegal substance possession and assault. In 1994, he sought sobriety through Alcoholics Anonymous and began working for his stepfather's construction company in Frankfurt, Germany. During this time, he dated a German woman, though the relationship did not lead to long-term plans. By late spring 1996, Blair returned to Surrey, where he resumed work as a construction foreman and lived with his mother. Friends noted his initial stability, but this would soon unravel. In late June 1996, Blair's behavior shifted dramatically. Colleagues observed uncharacteristic mood swings, and his mother recalled him becoming increasingly withdrawn. On July 1st, he abruptly quit his job, demanding his final paycheck. While the exact trigger remains unclear, friends later reported Blair had begun expressing vague fears about his safety, though he refused to name any specific threat. On the morning of July 5th, Blair visited his bank in Surrey and withdrew 6,000 Canadian dollars, which was nearly his entire savings in the account. He then emptied a safe deposit box containing an additional $10,000, along with gold coins, platinum bars, and jewelry. When questioned by his mother, Blair insisted someone was, quote, after him, but provided no further details. Later that day, he drove his red 1986 Chevrolet Chevette 4 hours to Courtenay, British Columbia to visit an uncle. Finding the uncle absent, Blair lingered in the area for 2 days, though his activities during this period are undocumented. On July 7th, Blair attempted to enter the United States via the BC Ferries route from Swartz Bay to Seattle, Washington. U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents flagged him as a potential substance courier due to the large sum of cash he carried, which totaled 16,000 Canadian. A background check revealed his criminal record, including drug-related charges, leading to his denial of entry. Blair then returned to Surrey, where he confided in friends about his fear of being killed, but again omitted specifics. Determined to reach the US, Blair purchased a round-trip airline ticket to Frankfurt, Germany for $1,700 on July 8th. His girlfriend in Frankfurt later told investigators she had no knowledge of his plans to visit. Hours later, Blair abruptly canceled the trip, citing the recipient's illness, and instead rented a blue Nissan Altima from Vancouver International Airport. That night, he drove to the Pacific Highway border crossing near Blaine, Washington, abandoning the Nissan and attempting to cross on foot. Canadian Border Patrol officers apprehended him around 2 a.m. on July 9th, noting scratches on his arms and legs. Blair matched the description of a suspect linked to a stolen blue vehicle recovered near the border, but authorities released him due to insufficient evidence. After his release, Blair rented a Toyota Camry from Vancouver International Airport and successfully crossed into America via the Peace Arch border crossing. He drove to the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, where he exchanged his Frankfurt ticket for a one-way flight to Washington, D.C., departing at 10:30 p.m. Upon landing at Dulles International Airport around 6:45 a.m. on July 10th, Blair rented a blue Ford Taurus. He began driving south but was involved in a minor collision on US Route 250 in Troy, Virginia around 9 a.m. The other driver described Blair as nice but in a hurry. That same day, Blair arrived in Knoxville, Tennessee, a city with no known personal or professional ties to him. Between 4 o'clock and 5 p.m., his movements that afternoon were marked by confusion and paranoia. At 5:30 p.m., he stopped at a BP gas station on Strawberry Plains Pike, claiming he couldn't unlock his rental car. A clerk observed him sweating profusely and using a key for a Nissan, which he abandoned back in Seattle instead of the Ford Taurus. 45 minutes later, tow truck driver Steve Hacker arrived and noted Blair's agitation. After unlocking the car, Blair offered Hacker $1,000 to drive him to Atlanta, Georgia, a request Hacker declined. At 7 p.m., Blair checked into the Fairfield Inn at 7403 Strawberry Plains Pike, Knoxville. Surveillance footage captured him entering the lobby at 7:37 p.m., where he paid $100 for a room but never occupied it. Hotel staff reported he lingered for 40 minutes, repeatedly exiting and re-entering the building. At approximately 7:13 a.m. on July 11th, construction workers arrived at the site of an under-construction Country Inn and Suites hotel located at 7471 Crosswood Boulevard near the Strawberry Plains Pike exit of Interstate 40 in Knoxville. The workers discovered Blair Adams's body in the parking lot less than a mile from the Fairfield Inn, where he had rented a room the previous evening. The area was part of a commercial development zone with scattered businesses and incomplete structures, providing limited visibility and foot traffic at night. Adams's body was found half naked, lying face up on the asphalt. His pants and underwear were pulled down to his ankles, exposing his lower body. His shirt was torn open, revealing a large bruise on his abdomen. His shoes and socks were missing, though one shoe was later found beneath his head. A violent blow to the stomach had ruptured his stomach wall, causing fatal septic shock. The injury resembled damage from a heavy impact, such as a stomp or blunt weapon. On his forehead, there was a deep laceration consistent with a strike from a crowbar, club, or firearm. On his arms, there were defensive wounds, including cuts and abrasions. The scene was further complicated by the array of items scattered around Adams' body and within a 100-yard radius. Investigators found over $4,000 in cash, consisting of US dollars, Canadian dollars, and German marks, as well as a fanny pack containing 5 troy ounces of gold bars, platinum coins, and jewelry. Nearby, a black duffel bag held maps, travel receipts, and various keys. Adams's passport, driver's license, and the key card for his Fairfield Inn room were also present among his belongings. The presence of these valuables, left untouched, strongly indicated that robbery was not the motive for the attack. One particularly puzzling piece of evidence was a single, long strand of dark hair clutched in Adams's right hand. Forensic analysis later confirmed that this hair did not belong to Adams, but despite repeated DNA testing, no match has ever been found in criminal databases. The autopsy, performed at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, provided crucial details regarding the circumstances of the death. The primary cause was identified as blunt force trauma to the abdomen, which ruptured his stomach. The injury was so severe that it would have required significant force, supporting the idea that Adams was either stomped, kicked, or struck with a heavy object. Toxicology tests revealed no drugs or alcohol in Adams' system, ruling out intoxication as a factor in his death. The contents of his stomach included partially digested food, lettuce, meat, and shrimp, suggesting that he had eaten a meal about 4 to 6 hours before his death, placing his last known activity in the early morning hours. Although the state of his clothing raised suspicions of assault, forensic examination found no evidence of semen, saliva, or foreign DNA on his body. Witness accounts added another layer of mystery to the timeline. A security guard working at a nearby business reported hearing a scream at around 3:30 a.m. on the morning of July 11th. Initially, the guard believed the scream came from a woman, but investigators later theorized it could have been Adams during the fatal attack. The last confirmed sighting of Adams was on surveillance footage at 7:37 p.m. the previous evening as he left the Fairfield Inn lobby. His activities between that time and the presumed time of the attack remain unaccounted for, as no witnesses reported seeing him during this crucial window. One of the earliest theories considered by investigators was that Adams's death was linked to a related encounter. The area where his body was discovered was close to a truck stop known for and the presence of a single long strand of dark hair clutched in his hand, possibly belonging to a woman, added to the suspicion that a sexual encounter may have taken place. Some investigators speculated that Adams might have solicited a box worker, and that the situation escalated into violence, possibly involving a pimp or another client. There is a theory that Adams was attacked inside a vehicle, thrown from it during a struggle, and may have been struck by the car as it sped away, causing the fatal abdominal injury. The presence of defensive wounds and the chaotic scattering of his belongings support the idea of a violent altercation. However, this theory is complicated by the lack of forensic evidence confirming sexual assault. The autopsy found no semen or foreign DNA on Adams's body, and toxicology reports were negative for drugs or alcohol. While the state of his clothing and the missing shoe suggest a struggle, the absence of clear evidence of activity or a robbery, since all his valuables were left at the scene, leaves this theory inconclusive. Another line of speculation is that Adams was the victim of a targeted attack, potentially by individuals he believed were pursuing him. In the weeks before his death, Adams exhibited increasing paranoia, telling friends and his mother that someone was trying to kill him and that rumors were being spread about him. He abruptly quit his job, withdrew large sums of cash, and traveled erratically across North America, actions that could be interpreted as attempts to flee a real threat. Some have suggested that Adams may have been involved in something illicit or witnessed something dangerous, perhaps connected to his work in Germany or Canada, and that his fears were justified. The theory posits that Adams arranged a meeting in Knoxville, possibly with someone he knew or someone connected to his past, and was murdered during this encounter. The fact that none of his valuables were taken could indicate that the killer was looking for something specific, perhaps information, documents, or an item Adams was carrying. The deliberate nature of the attack, the lack of theft, and the possibility of a prearranged meeting lend some weight to this theory. Despite these considerations, there is no concrete evidence supporting the existence of such a threat. Investigators have never identified any suspects or credible leads linking Adams to criminal activity or specific individuals who might have wanted him dead. The theory remains speculative, relying heavily on Adams's own statements and the circumstantial evidence of his behavior. Another widely discussed theory is that Adams suffered a severe mental health crisis, possibly a paranoid episode or psychotic break, in the days leading up to his death. His abrupt changes in behavior are consistent with the onset of a psychological disorder such as acute paranoia or schizophrenia. The fact that Adams had no diagnosed history of mental illness complicates this theory, but those close to him observed a dramatic shift in his personality, including mood swings, insomnia, and agitation. Proponents of this theory argue that Adams's paranoia was internally generated rather than based on real threats. His actions, such as repeatedly attempting to cross the border, purchasing tickets to multiple destinations, and ultimately ending up in Knoxville with no clear reason, could be explained by a deteriorating mental state. The chaotic scene of his death, with belongings scattered and clothing in disarray, might have resulted from confusion or panic during a psychotic episode. Some have even speculated that Adams's injuries could have been self-inflicted during a moment of extreme distress, though the severity of the fatal blow makes this unlikely. Despite renewed investigative efforts and advances in forensic technology, the case remains unsolved. The Knox County Sheriff's Office has re-examined DNA evidence as recently as 2016, but no new leads have emerged. The case has been featured on programs such as Unsolved Mysteries and continues to attract attention from true crime enthusiasts and amateur sleuths. Another interesting line of inquiry that led down a dead end was the man that Blair was reportedly conversing with on the night before his death. It's said that he visited several different restaurants with this unidentified man in Knoxville, but it's not known if the man had any involvement in the incident. Furthermore, Blair's mother stated in an interview that he had previously been seeing a male roommate romantically. However, this piece of information was revealed later into the investigation, and thus may have not been as effective. The unsolved murder of Willie Flint Lee in Simpson County, Mississippi stands as one of the state's most haunting cold cases. In August 2009, Lee, a respected chicken farmer and former volunteer firefighter, was found dead under violent and suspicious circumstances. Despite initial investigative leads, arrests, and even a confession, the case remains open, with Lee's family and local authorities still seeking justice. In the days before his disappearance, Lee went about his routine like normal, tending to his farm and spending time with family. On Sunday, August 2nd, 2009, he was last seen by friends and family at his local church, a regular part of his weekly life. There were no public indications that anything was amiss or that Lee was in danger, and those close to him did not notice any unusual behavior or signs of distress. Monday, August 3rd began like any other day for Lee. However, as the day wore on, his family grew concerned when they could not reach him. That afternoon, Lee's Chevrolet pickup truck was seen driving past his house. However, it was not clear who was behind the wheel, and it is now believed that the vehicle was being driven by someone other than Lee, most likely his killer. As evening approached and Lee still had not returned home or made contact, his family's worries intensified. Late on the night of August 3rd, a motorist traveling along Mississippi Highway 13, a few miles outside of Mendenhall, noticed a truck ablaze at the bottom of a ravine just off the highway. The motorist immediately called authorities to report the fire. Volunteer firefighters from the town responded quickly, arriving at the scene to find the vehicle engulfed in flames. After extinguishing the fire, responders examined the truck and made several alarming discoveries. The vehicle, which was soon identified as belonging to Flint Lee, had been riddled with bullet holes along the driver's side door. The absence of a body inside the vehicle only deepened the mystery and heightened the family's fears. The location of the truck raised immediate suspicions. There were no skid marks on the highway above or at the spot where the truck had come to rest, suggesting it had not careened off the road accidentally. Instead, investigators theorized that the truck had been deliberately pushed into the ravine after being set on fire, likely as an attempt to destroy evidence and mislead authorities about the nature of the incident. With Lee still missing and his truck found in such suspicious circumstances, a search effort was quickly organized. Family, friends, and law enforcement fanned out across the area, hoping for any sign of Lee. The search reached a turning point when Charles Earl, Lee's brother-in-law, decided to follow his instincts and drive around the area. Earl later recounted that he was compelled by a gut feeling to stop on a bridge spanning the Strong River, not far from where the truck had been discovered. Looking down from the bridge, Earl spotted a body floating in the water below. It was soon confirmed to be Flint Lee. The scene on the bridge provided crucial forensic evidence. Investigators found blood spatters on the bridge's surface, leading them to believe that Lee had been shot there and then thrown into the river. The condition of Lee's body and the blood evidence suggested that he had died almost instantly from a gunshot wound to the torso. The pathologist's report confirmed this, stating that Lee had not survived the attack and that his body had been disposed of in the river shortly after the shooting. In the days and weeks following the murder, investigators launched a comprehensive effort to interview Lee's family, friends, and acquaintances. They sought to reconstruct Lee's final movements, determine whether he had any known enemies, and uncover any underlying motives for the crime. Lee's last confirmed sighting was at church the day before his murder, and his truck was seen driving past his house on the afternoon of the crime, though it was suspected that the killer, not Lee, was behind the wheel at that time, as we have previously mentioned. Despite their efforts, investigators struggled to identify a clear motive. Those close to Lee described him as a well-liked, generous, and reliable member of the community, with no known conflicts or disputes that would explain such a violent end. The lack of obvious motive added a layer of complexity to the investigation, forcing detectives to consider a broad range of possibilities, from robbery to personal vendetta. One of the first individuals to draw investigative attention was Charles Earl, Lee's brother-in-law. Earl had discovered Lee's body in the river after following a hunch and stopping on the bridge. Investigators initially found it suspicious that he had stopped at exactly the right spot to spot the body and noted his outspoken demeanor during interviews. However, after thoroughly examining his actions, statements, and alibi, detectives determined that Earl had no involvement in the murder and cleared him as a suspect. With few leads emerging from personal interviews, law enforcement expanded their efforts to canvass the broader community. They appealed to the public for information, hoping that someone might have witnessed suspicious activity near the bridge, the ravine, or along Highway 13 on the night of the murder. Flyers were distributed and local media coverage kept the case in the public eye, but no credible eyewitnesses came forward to provide actionable information. The investigation took a significant turn about 4 months after the murder, when detectives from Simpson and Rankin counties arrested 3 men: Bryce Mills, Roderick Gilbert, and Christopher Hubbard, aged 36, 32, and 25 respectively. The arrests were made based on new information, which suggested the suspects might have been involved in a robbery that escalated to murder. During questioning, Hubbard confessed to participating in the crime and implicated the other 2 men, stating that the group targeted Lee while he was sleeping in his truck, intending to rob him. The situation escalated, resulting in Lee's fatal shooting. Hubbard's confession seemed to provide the breakthrough investigators needed, and all 3 men were charged with murder, vehicle burglary, and grand larceny. However, Hubbard later recanted his confession, without corroborating physical evidence, much of which had been destroyed in the truck fire, and lacking reliable eyewitness testimony. Prosecutors were unable to proceed. All 3 suspects were released due to insufficient evidence, and the case stalled once again. Despite the robbery theory, some investigators and community members have considered the possibility of a targeted killing or personal vendetta. Lee's lack of known enemies makes this theory less likely, but the calculated nature of the crime, the deliberate burning of the truck, the careful disposal of the body, and the absence of a clear motive has led some to speculate that the murder may have been more personal or premeditated than a robbery gone wrong. Despite exhaustive investigative efforts, the murder of Flint Lee remains unsolved. The Simpson County Sheriff's Department continues to treat the case as a cold case, and Lee's family and law enforcement have made repeated public appeals for information. The case has been featured on true crime podcasts, cold case websites, and in national media, keeping public attention alive and generating occasional new leads. Diana Robertson and Mike Reamer's lives and relationship were complex, marked by both shared aspirations and significant turmoil. Their story culminating in a notorious unsolved murder in the forests of Washington in December 1985. Diana was born in 1964 and grew up in Washington state. By the age of 21, she was already a mother to a 2-year-old daughter named Crystal. Described by those who knew her as a beautiful and caring young woman, Diana was deeply devoted to her daughter and worked hard to provide a stable environment for her. She had maintained a relationship with Mike since she was 17 years old. Diana's family, including her mother Louise Conrad and sister Darlene Robertson, played significant roles in her life, particularly after her disappearance, as they advocated for answers and justice. Mike Reamer was 36 years old at the time of the disappearance, making him 15 years Diana's senior. He was an experienced outdoorsman, having learned trapping and wilderness survival skills from his father, Lloyd, a retired Washington state game warden. Mike worked as a roofer for Queen City Sheet Metal and Roofing Inc. in Seattle, but trapping was both a source of supplemental income and a personal passion. He was known for his ruggedness and self-sufficiency, traits that made him comfortable in the remote forests of Pierce and Lewis counties. Mike also had another daughter from a previous relationship, indicating a complicated personal life. The relationship between Diana and Mike went through many cycles of reconciliation and conflict. Despite the restraining order and repeated incidents of violence, including tire slashing and multiple arrests for assault, the duo continued to see each other. Friends and family described their relationship as tumultuous but persistent, with Diana often returning to Mike after periods of separation. This pattern of abuse and reconciliation is not uncommon in relationships marked by domestic violence, where emotional bonds and hopes for change can make it difficult for victims to leave permanently. By December 1985, Diana and Mike had apparently reconciled and they planned a family outing with their daughter Crystal. Their decision to spend the day together in the woods was not unusual. Mike's trapping routes often took him deep into the forests, and Diana sometimes accompanied him, bringing Crystal along for the adventure. On the morning of December 12, 1985, Mike and Diana set out from their home in Puyallup alongside their daughter. The family's plan was to spend the day in the mountains near Tacoma, searching for a Christmas tree and for Mike to check his animal traps along the Nisqually River in Pierce County. Before heading out, Mike stopped at his father's house to borrow gas money and mentioned his plans to check traps in Morton and work overtime at his roofing job over the weekend. This detail would later be important as it established the family's intended route and Mike's mindset on the day of their disappearance. Witnesses later recalled seeing the family along Mike's trapping route. Some reported that they saw the family launch a boat into the river with Mike floating upstream to check his traps while Diana and Crystal drove to meet him at the next stop. These sightings placed the family together and in good spirits during the early part of the day. However, at some point that afternoon, something went terribly wrong. The next confirmed sighting of any member of the family would be of Crystal, alone and far from the woods. Later that same day, customers at a Kmart store in Spanaway, about 30 miles north of the area where the family had been searching for a tree, discovered Crystal wandering alone outside the store entrance. She was unharmed but appeared dazed and unable to explain what had happened to her parents. Crystal was taken to a local hospital for evaluation and then placed in temporary foster care. It wasn't until 2 days later that Crystal's maternal grandmother, Louise Conrad, saw her photograph on a local news broadcast and contacted authorities, confirming Crystal's identity and linking her to the missing couple. When asked where her mother was, Crystal could only say, "Mommy was in the trees." Investigators noted that the 2-year-old was, quote, not nearly verbal enough to provide any more information, but her statement would later prove hauntingly accurate. With Crystal found and her parents missing, authorities launched an extensive search operation. Police and volunteers scoured the forests, focusing on the areas where Mike was known to trap. Mike's father, Lloyd, led volunteer efforts and personally checked Mike's trap lines several times a week. The family's red 1982 Plymouth pickup truck was also missing. The search was hampered by harsh winter conditions, including several inches of snowfall that concealed potential evidence and made the dense forest even more difficult to navigate. Despite these efforts, neither Diana nor Mike was found in the initial search, and the case quickly grew cold. The lack of immediate clues and the vastness of the search area frustrated both authorities and the Reamer and Robertson families. More than 2 months after the disappearance, on February 18, 1986, a significant break occurred. A man driving north on Route 7 near LB pulled off the main road to let his dog out. The dog led him up a nearby logging road for about 1.5 miles, where the man spotted an abandoned vehicle partially covered by snow. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was Mike's missing pickup truck. Nearby, he discovered a body which he initially mistook for a deer carcass. The remains were soon identified as Diana Robertson. She was found half buried in snow, lying in a dense forest land area just west of Mineral, Washington. The site was remote and surrounded by thick woods. Mike's father later noted that he had passed a logging road several times but had not checked it because Mike did not trap in that specific area. An autopsy revealed that Diana had been stabbed 17 times and had a tube sock tied around her neck, a chilling detail that resembled the murder of Ruth Cooper, another local woman killed 4 months earlier. Diana was nude from the waist up, with her jeans still on, and her arms had been tied behind her back with a ligature made from her bra. The scene suggested a personal, violent attack. Inside the truck, police found bloodstains on the front seat and a manila envelope on the dashboard with the message, "I love you, Diana," written on it. Diana's mother believed the handwriting belonged to Mike, but FBI analysis was inconclusive. The presence of the note and the blood only deepened the mystery. Mike was nowhere to be found, and his gun, which he typically carried on trapping excursions, was also missing. With Diana's body found and Mike missing, suspicion quickly fell on him. His history of domestic violence, the restraining order, and his sudden disappearance made him the prime suspect in the eyes of law enforcement. Some investigators theorized that Mike had killed Diana, dropped Crystal off at the store, and then fled or committed suicide in the woods. Others speculated that he might have been responsible for the earlier murders of Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper, given the similarities in the cases and the proximity of the crime scenes to Mike's trapping area. However, there were inconsistencies in this theory. Mike's father pointed out that Mike was an experienced outdoorsman and would not have left his winter coat in the truck, especially with temperatures around freezing on the day of the disappearance. Furthermore, Mike had not accessed his bank account, collected his last paycheck, or contacted his other daughter or family members since the disappearance. These details suggested that Mike's disappearance might not have been voluntary. Moreover, since the FBI's handwriting analysis on the note was inconclusive, it left open the possibility that someone else could have written it. The lack of a clear motive for Mike to murder Diana, especially after their recent reconciliation, further complicated the case. As the years passed and no sign of Mike Reamer was found, the theory that both Mike and Diana were victims of a serial killer gained traction. Investigators drew parallels from the Harkins and Cooper case, including the remote wooded areas in which they were attacked, the use of a tube sock, the close time frame that the crimes were committed, and the lack of evidence that Mike survived. Detective David Nizer of the Lewis County Sheriff's Department stated that the tube sock on Diana had been tied with exactly the same type of knot as in the earlier murder of Ruth Cooper, further suggesting a connection. Law enforcement considered the possibility that an unknown serial killer had murdered both couples and then hidden Mike's body, either to frame him or simply as part of the same violent pattern. The case took a dramatic turn in 2011 when hikers discovered a partial human skull less than a mile from where Diana's body had been found 25 years earlier. DNA testing confirmed that the skull belonged to Mike Reamer. The condition of the skull allowed authorities to rule out a gunshot wound to the head, but the cause of death could not be determined due to the limited remains. No other traces of Mike were found, and his death remains as mysterious as Diana's. This discovery fundamentally altered the investigation, with Mike's remains found so close to Diana's and with no evidence of or self-inflicted injury. Law enforcement began to reconsider the theory that Mike was the perpetrator. Instead, it became increasingly likely that Mike, like Diana, had been murdered and that the true killer remained unidentified. Following the discovery of Mike's remains, the case was reclassified as a double homicide, and detectives renewed their efforts to find the killer. Advances in forensic technology, including the preservation of partial DNA profiles from the crime scenes, offered hope that new leads might emerge. Despite decades of investigation, the murders remain unsolved. Advances in forensic technology have not yet produced a suspect, though DNA evidence from the crime scenes remains on file and could one day yield new leads. The body of an unidentified white female, later designated the Loudoun County Jane Doe, was discovered on December 16, 1961, along Route 715, approximately 1 mile west of Hillsborough, Virginia. The exact location was near the intersection of Near Lane and Cider Mill Road, a rural area with a sparse population and limited infrastructure at the time. The victim was found on the roadside, partially concealed by vegetation, and was reported by a passing motorist who noticed irregularities in the landscape. Law enforcement responded promptly, securing the scene and initiating a preliminary investigation. The victim was estimated to be 18 years old, though forensic analysis suggested a possible age range of 16 to 19 years. She stood 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighed approximately 95 pounds, with a slender build. Distinctive physical features included brown hair, brown eyes, and a slight overbite. Dental records revealed evidence of prior dental work, including a gold crown on the upper left first molar, which investigators later emphasized as a potential identifier. Notably, her hands and feet showed no signs of manual labor, suggesting she may have lived in circumstances that limited physical exertion. The victim was found wearing a red plaid wool skirt, a white slip, and a blue sweater. No shoes, coat, or outerwear were recovered at the scene, raising questions about whether she had been transported to the location or stripped of protective clothing post-mortem. The absence of jewelry, identification documents, or personal items complicated efforts to trace her identity. The clothing, while modest, showed no distinctive labels or markings that could link her to a specific retailer or geographic region. The victim was transported to the office of the chief medical examiner in Manassas, Virginia, where an autopsy confirmed homicide by gunshot wound. The fatal injury was a single gunshot, though the exact caliber and firearm type were not specified in the original report. The medical examiner estimated the time of death at approximately 48 hours prior to discovery, based on rigor mortis and environmental conditions. Additional observations from the autopsy included bruising and abrasions on the arms and torso, a lack of defensive wounds, and a well-maintained appearance including manicured nails with purple and red polish and a lack of calluses. The sheriff's office launched an extensive investigation, canvassing the local community and distributing sketches of the victim in hopes of finding someone who recognized her. Despite these efforts, no credible leads emerged. The investigation faced significant challenges, including the limited forensic technology available in the early 1960s, the absence of matching missing persons reports in Virginia or nearby states, and the rural location, which provided few witnesses and little physical evidence. In early 1962, Deputy Marvin Davis of Durham County, North Carolina, contacted Loudoun authorities regarding his 16-year-old niece, Elizabeth Ann Smith, who had disappeared from Washington, D.C. in August 1961. Davis provided photographs and details about Elizabeth, but without the benefit of DNA testing, investigators could not confirm a match at that time. Advances in forensic science have breathed new life into the case in recent years. In 2015, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children extracted DNA from Jane Doe's remains and uploaded the profile to national databases, but no matches were found. In 2024, her remains were exhumed for further genetic testing, but issues with Virginia's burial laws initially delayed her reburial until the county board amended the regulations to allow it. Investigators have also partnered with organizations like the DNA Doe Project to use advanced genetic genealogy techniques in the search for her identity, though results are still pending. Again, one of the most persistent theories is that the Jane Doe may be Elizabeth Ann Smith. The similarities are striking. Both were petite, had brown hair and brown eyes, and the timing of Elizabeth's disappearance aligns closely with the estimated post-mortem interval for Jane Doe. The geographic proximity between DC and the location where Jane Doe was found also supports this theory. However, mitochondrial DNA comparisons conducted in 2020 were inconclusive, and investigators are now awaiting results from nuclear DNA testing performed after the 2024 exhumation. Other theories have been considered over the years, including the possibility that a local perpetrator was responsible. Early on, a traveling salesman who frequented Route 715 was investigated, but no evidence linked him to the crime. Some investigators have also speculated that Jane Doe may have been a victim of human trafficking, as no local missing persons reports matched her description, suggesting she may have been brought to the area from elsewhere.